Welcome to the Bookcast.
We take your sources, extract the key knowledge fast.
Hmm.
Today we're diving into Wayne Dyer's Your Erroneous Zones, Tutris Zonas Erroneous. Really looking at how we often create our own unhappiness.
Yeah, exactly. And you know those feelings that can just trap you, like being totally overwhelmed or maybe paralyzed by commitments?
Or that constant guilt or insecurity.
Yeah. Dyer's argument is, well, these aren't really inflicted on us from the outside. He says they come from within, from these erroneous zones.
Erroneous zones. And his approach, it feels quite direct, almost like having a therapy session in each chapter, but, friendly.
Right.
So our mission for this dive is to pull out those first key ideas, taking charge of your emotions, and why self-love is just fundamental.
Okay, so he starts with this really vivid analogy. A speaker, worms, alcohol, water. You remember this one?
I do, yeah. The takeaway depends entirely on the listener's bias, right? Someone hears, alcohol prevents worms.
Exactly. It shows perfectly how we filter things. We hear what fits our existing beliefs, basically what we want to hear.
And he uses that to pivot straight into his main point. You really can control your feelings. It's not about the outside world having this power over you.
He lays it out with simple logic. 1, I can control my thoughts. 2, my feelings come from my thoughts.
Therefore,
I can control my feelings. Sounds simple, but it really goes against how we often talk about emotions, like we're just victims.
it does. We hear about nervous breakdowns like they're, a physical thing that just happens. Dyer suggests real intelligence is choosing happiness, even when things are difficult.
Right, it makes you rethink saying things like, you made me angry or you offended me.
Yeah, that deflection.
He reframes it. Instead of you offend me, maybe it's more accurate to think, okay, I felt offended because of the story I told myself about your reaction.
That puts the control back internally.
It does. Now, changing those thought habits, that's not instant. It takes real conscious effort.
Yeah.
Like learning to drive stick shift, maybe.
That's a good comparison. And it brings up choice. He makes this point. If being miserable immediately resulted in, say, an electric shock,
Haha, yeah.
you'd probably choose a different feeling pretty quickly, wouldn't you?
You absolutely would. And another huge piece for Dyer is living now in the present. He gives these little vignettes. Someone in beautiful woods just running through their to-do list.
Or someone sunbathing but only thinking about the tan they'll have later, not feeling the sun now.
Exactly. Or, a mind wandering during an intimate moment, or drifting off when trying to focus. We escape the present constantly.
By dwelling on the past or jumping into the future.
Right. And Dyer says real living, real growth happens now. It's not just about fixing problems or perceived flaws from the past.
Which leads nicely into his next big area, self-esteem. He calls it the first love.
The first love. And he argues it's absolutely fundamental, but society often twists it. Makes it seem selfish, right, from when we're kids. Well, think about how early messages can sort of diminish a child's sense of their own importance. Maybe too much emphasis on sharing everything, even when it overrides the child's own feelings or needs at that moment.
Interesting. And his definition of love, allowing others to be themselves.
Yeah.
Without pushing your expectations onto them.
Exactly. And that has to start with how you treat yourself. He uses this example of Noah, who can't say I love you because he's afraid.
Afraid he won't hear it back.
Yeah, afraid he won't get that external proof that he's okay, that he's worthy.
But Dyer's point is that worth is inherent, right? It's not tied to what you do or what others think.
Precisely. It's the difference between telling a child you're bad versus that behavior was bad. One attacks the self, the other addresses an action. It shapes self-perception profoundly.
And he pushes back against this idea of a fixed self-concept. Instead, look at specific areas.
Yeah.
How do you feel about yourself physically, intellectually, socially?
Yeah, break it down. Physically, for instance, he really challenges us to accept our natural selves despite constant media messages telling us we're not okay as we are.
Because that marketing needs us to feel dissatisfied.
Absolutely. So his advice is consciously choose better self-images. Catch that negative self-talk. Stop the constant comparisons.
He even lists common ways we sabotage ourselves, like rejecting compliments.
Oh, yeah. Or making excuses if someone says you look nice. Oh, this old thing. Or deflecting credit for something you did well.
It's about accepting yourself without protest, as he puts it. Complaining about things you can't change is, well, it's an erroneous zone itself.
Definitely. And importantly, this self-love isn't arrogance. True self-acceptance doesn't need external applause to feel valid.
He even explores the sort of weird payoffs people get from not loving themselves.
Right, like avoiding the risks of real intimacy, or maybe getting pity, or always having a scapegoat for why things aren't working out.
So what are the practical steps then?
He suggests things like actively correcting that inner critic when it pops up, actually accepting compliments, saying thank you.
Simple, but hard sometimes.
Prioritizing things you enjoy. Basic self-care. The big goal is detaching your sense of worth from what you achieve or what others say.
Okay, so wrapping up this part of the dive, the core takeaways seem to be: 1, you really do have the power to choose your emotional state by managing your thoughts.
Yes, that's fundamental.
And 2, genuine self-love isn't selfish or optional. It's the absolute bedrock for a happy, fulfilled life.
Couldn't say it better. Which kind of leaves you, the listener, with a thought. Are you ready to start dismantling some of your erroneous zones? To really own the value you already have?
And maybe consider those self-diminishing habits we talked about. Do any of those sound familiar in your own day-to-day? Something to think about.
Today, we're digging into something I think a lot of us feel, this constant push for perfection, and maybe underneath that, a fear of what we don't know.
Exactly. It's this idea that always striving, always being perfect is the goal. But what if it actually, holds us back?
Right. We've looked at some sources exploring these kinds of self-limiting beliefs, perfectionism, that fear of the unknown, and also the tyranny of shoulds.
Things we feel we have to do.
Yeah. So our mission today is to understand how needing everything to be just right can block growth, happiness, even just trying new things, and maybe find a way to focus more on what drives us internally instead of seeking that outside approval.
It's interesting because we often hear about the drive for success, but some of these writings talk about a neurosis of success, this pressure. It can actually stop you from enjoying simple stuff.
Or even developing fully as a person. There's this example, Luan, super smart student, right?
I remember that one.
Totally focused on grades, academics. But her social life, her emotional understanding, kind of lagging behind.
And her breakthrough came when she started valuing her own feelings, using those amazing learning skills on people skills.
And the punchline is her mom celebrating a B grade because it meant Luann was finally getting some balance, living a bit more. So why do we push so hard to always do our best?
Well, the sources suggest perfectionism itself can be paralyzing, like that Winston Churchill idea about perfection being immobilizing.
Ah, right. If you can't do it perfectly, maybe just don't do it.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
That mindset stops people. The key seems to be identifying the few areas where excellence really matters, but for most things.
Yeah.
Just, doing them is better than getting frozen and trying for perfection.
That rings true. How often do we avoid trying something because we're pegged we won't ace it immediately?
And that connects directly to this fear of the unknown, doesn't it?
It really does. It makes you wonder how much of our daily life is dictated by that fear.
Well, the list is pretty long, according to these sources. Eating the same things, wearing the same style.
Sticking to news or opinions that just confirm what we already think.
Exactly. Avoiding hobbies because you might not be good right away. Staying in jobs or even relationships that aren't, fulfilling.
All because
the unknown feels risky. It might involve failure or disapproval if we aren't seen as giving our absolute best.
it's like we build these little bubbles, and the mental gymnastics we do to stay inside them are kind of wild.
Right, like actively avoiding imagining different possibilities, keeping anything unknown at a distance just to manage the fear.
Even procrastinating, which seems counterintuitive, but the sources frame it as this weird form of delayed gratification sometimes.
It's fascinating. And a core idea here is about control.
Yeah.
Do we feel like we are in the driver's seat, or are external forces running the show? That internal versus external locus of control.
If it's more external, we're more susceptible to those shoulds, right? To conventional thinking.
Precisely. Like Barbara, in one of the examples, dealing with obesity. Initially, it was all external factors to blame.
But then she had that realization.
Yeah, that her choices were central, and crucially, that she had the power to change things. That internal shift.
Okay, so this external focus also feeds into that right versus wrong trap, doesn't it? The need to always be right.
Oh, absolutely. It hinders happiness, messes up communication. The goal isn't to always be right, but to understand different viewpoints, to see why someone else sees it differently.
Which must be why decisions can be so hard sometimes. We get stuck searching for the single right choice.
Instead of seeing decisions as just, leading to different consequences, not inherently good or bad, just different paths.
And then there are the shoulds, that tyranny of the shoulds, all these external rules piled on us.
They create so much tension, right? Disrupt relationships. It's quite freeing when you realize you can just reject the unnecessary ones. Choose your own preferences.
It even extends to blindly following rules or traditions that maybe don't even make sense anymore.
Yeah, like some of those examples of silly swimming pool rules or outdated military regulations followed just because they're rules.
It pushes for more critical thinking, like, wait, does this rule actually serve a purpose here, now?
And another big one is the justice trap.
The idea that the world must be perfectly fair. Which, let's be honest,
It isn't always right.
Right.
And focusing constantly on what's not fair just breeds negativity and inaction. You get stuck.
And you see it poisoning personal relationships too, that constant "it's not fair" comparison. Like Judy's marriage, where keeping score overshadowed everything else.
It's almost like a form of scorekeeping. And jealousy often is tied into this demand for justice or fairness in relationships too.
Stemming from insecurity, maybe? Dependence on someone else's actions for your own okayness.
Yeah, a lack of self-confidence, like Helen focusing so hard on the unfairness of her husband's affair, rather than her own response, her own choices moving forward.
And ultimately, all these threads, perfectionism, fear of the unknown, the justice trap, they seem to weave into procrastination.
Definitely. That fear of failure or just not doing it perfectly leads to delay, putting it off.
And missing chances to grow, to learn, to just live. There's that distinction between being a doer and just a critic, right?
Right. The importance of just taking action, however imperfectly, versus constantly evaluating and postponing.
So maybe the final thought for you listening is this. Consider the sheer amount of energy that goes into chasing this impossible perfection, into fearing what's next.
What if you could redirect even some of that?
Yeah, redirect it towards exploring, trying things out, embracing the messiness. What might you discover about yourself, about the world, if the focus shifted from flawless execution to simply engaging, something to mull over?